During the Cold War, the CIA didn't just watch satellites, decode messages, and recruit spies. They also paid people to close their eyes and try to see enemy secrets with their minds. Not in a movie, not in an internet myth. In real government programs, hidden behind names like SCANATE, Grill Flame, Sunstreak, and Stargate. This is not a story about magic portals, time travel, demons, or aliens, and it is not the same thing as the gateway process. This is stranger in a different way, because Project Stargate was real. It was part of a long chain of American intelligence projects that tried to answer one terrifying Cold War question. What if the enemy was developing abilities we did not understand? In Washington, during the nuclear age, impossible ideas became dangerous if the Soviets were studying them first. If Moscow was researching psychotronics, psychic warfare, or mind-based espionage, then the United States could not afford to laugh. Because in the Cold War, being skeptical was safe. But being late could be fatal. So the American intelligence world stepped into a shadow zone between science, fear, and belief. And for more than 20 years, it tried to turn the human mind into a spy satellite. The roots of Stargate begin in fear, not fantasy, fear. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, U.S. intelligence officials were receiving reports that the Soviet Union was investing in research connected to psychic phenomena, parapsychology, and something called psychotronics. The claims were controversial, the science was uncertain, but the fear was very real. America had already lived through the shock of Sputnik. It had already seen the Soviet Union put the first satellite into orbit and the first human into space. So when reports suggested that Soviet scientists might be exploring the military use of the mind, some people inside U.S. intelligence asked a question that sounds insane today. What if they are right? What if psychic ability was not superstition? What if it was a weapon? What if the next intelligence race was not only in space or under the ocean or inside encrypted messages, but inside the human mind? That fear opened the door, and behind that door was Stanford Research Institute. In the early 1970s, the Stanford Research Institute, known as SRI, became one of the most important places in this strange story. There, researchers Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff began working on experiments connected to remote viewing. Remote viewing was the attempt to describe a distant place, object, person, or event without physically being there. No camera, no map, no normal access. Just a person, a target, and the claim that the mind could somehow reach across distance. Among the most famous names connected to this world were Ingo Swann, Pat Price, and later Joe McMoneagle. Swann became associated with coordinate remote viewing, where a viewer might be given coordinates or a target reference and asked to describe what they perceived. Pat Price was remembered by supporters as one of the most impressive early viewers. Joe McMoneagle would later become one of the best-known military remote viewers connected to the program. The sessions did not look like a superhero movie. They looked quiet, almost boring. A room, a table, paper, a monitor, sometimes an envelope, sometimes coordinates. The viewer would close their eyes, relax, and begin speaking. Shapes, textures, water, metal, a structure, a road, a feeling of height, a cold place, a circular object. The descriptions were written down, sketched, reviewed, compared, argued over, sometimes They seemed meaningless. Sometimes, according to supporters, they seemed disturbingly close. And that was enough to keep the money flowing. The story did not stay inside a laboratory. Over time, remote viewing moved through a maze of government names, agencies, and military offices. The early CIA-connected effort was called SCANATE, short for Scan by Coordinate. Then came programs connected to the Army and military intelligence: Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, and eventually Stargate. Each name sounds like it belongs to a classified anime series about psychic soldiers and nuclear war, but these were real labels used around real government activity. The CIA was involved in early research. The Defense Intelligence Agency became deeply connected later. INSCOM, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, played a role, and Fort Meade, Maryland, became one of the locations tied to the operational side of the story. This was the strange heart of Stargate. Serious institutions testing something most scientists considered fringe: government offices, classified documents, military taskings, and people sitting in quiet rooms trying to describe secret targets with their minds. According to historical summaries, more than 40 people served in the program at different times, including around 24 remote viewers. The cost over more than 2 decades was around $20 million. Not huge by Pentagon standards, but enough to prove this was more than a joke. The U.S. government did not casually spend 20 years testing psychic spying because it thought the idea was funny. It did it because the Cold War made even absurd possibilities feel strategically necessary. But here is where the story gets darker, because the real question is not just whether remote viewing worked in a lab. The real question is what happened when intelligence agencies tried to use it against real-world targets: lost aircraft, Soviet facilities, submarines, hostages, dictators, missiles. Places where being wrong was not just embarrassing, it could be deadly. Over the years, remote viewers were reportedly tasked with a wide range of intelligence questions. Some accounts claim viewers were asked about Soviet installations. Others mention lost aircraft, submarines under construction, kidnapped hostages, underground facilities, chemical and biological weapon sites, and later, Gulf War targets. There were reported attempts connected to Saddam Hussein. There were claims about Scud missiles. There were stories involving Soviet aircraft, Libyan targets, and secret military facilities. But every one of these examples must be handled carefully, because reported does not mean proven. Claimed does not mean confirmed, and interesting does not mean operationally useful. Supporters of the program believed some results were too accurate to ignore. They pointed to moments where a viewer seemed to describe a real location, a structure, or a hidden detail without normal access. To them, these were not random guesses. They were signals, fragments of something real, but critics saw a different picture. They argued that many descriptions were vague, too broad, too symbolic, too easy to interpret after the fact. A viewer might say, metal structure near water, and later someone could search for a match. Was that intelligence? Or was it pattern making? Was it a psychic hit? Or a human brain trying to build meaning out of noise? That tension is what makes Stargate so fascinating. It lives in the space between belief and doubt, between the impressive and the useless, between the unexplained and the unreliable. By 1995, The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union was gone. And the psychic spy program was running out of historical oxygen. That year, the CIA commissioned the American Institutes for Research to evaluate the program. The review looked at both the research side and the operational intelligence side, and the conclusion was careful, not simple, not dramatic, not the kind of answer the internet wants. Some laboratory experiments showed statistically significant results. In plain English, that means the results were interesting enough that researchers could not simply dismiss them as ordinary chance without further debate. But that did not prove psychic powers. The reviewers said the findings did not provide an unequivocal demonstration that remote viewing existed as a paranormal ability. There were concerns about methodology, interpretation, replication, and whether the results could be explained by other factors. And when it came to real intelligence work, the conclusion was even more damaging. Remote viewing had not demonstrated reliable operational value. It did not provide the kind of specific, consistent, actionable intelligence that agencies need when lives, wars, and national security decisions are involved. In other words, something strange may have appeared in some lab data, but whatever it was not reliable enough to guide intelligence operations. And in espionage, unreliable information is not a miracle. It is a liability. So Stargate was shut down. The files began moving into the daylight, and one of the strangest chapters in American intelligence history became public. Project Stargate does not prove that psychic powers are real. It also does not prove that nothing unusual ever happened. The honest answer is less comfortable than both extremes. For more than 20 years, serious people inside serious institutions tested an idea that sounded impossible because history had taught them a brutal lesson. Never assume your enemy is not experimenting with the unthinkable. That is the real story. Not magic, not portals, not internet mythology. Fear. The Cold War was a machine that turned anxiety into budgets, rumors into research, and fringe ideas into classified programs. It made governments stare into the unknown and ask, can this be weaponized? Can this be controlled? Can this give us an advantage before the other side gets it first? In that sense, Project Stargate is not just a story about psychic spying. It is a story about what powerful nations become when they are afraid. A laboratory light buzzing in the dark, a viewer sketching shapes on paper, a military officer waiting for an answer, a map of the Soviet Union on the wall, and somewhere behind all of it, the silent pressure of nuclear war. The scariest part isn't whether psychic spying worked, it's that during the Cold War, fear made the most powerful intelligence agencies on Earth willing to try almost anything. If you like dark history, Cold War secrets, and the strange places where power meets fear, subscribe to Anime History. And now I want to know what you think. Was Project Stargate a serious attempt to study the unknown, or proof that paranoia can make even governments believe in ghosts?